how to counter a buyer or a buyer's agent that makes an offer to you and requests closing costs or seller concessions, we call it. They ask for 3%, 4%, 5% back of the sales price to help them close the loan. The reason why they do this is they don't have the money. So they have the down payment, maybe it's FHA, they have the 3.5% down, but they don't have the 4% that it costs to close a mortgage. So they say, okay, seller, help me out. Now the risk in this is that if you add that closing cost to the contract and you inflate the contract by $4,000 or $5,000 for closing costs, that means you sold the house that much higher, which means you're going to have to appraise the house for that much higher. So if the appraisal doesn't come in because you move the contract up a little bit to pay for this extra cost for the buyer, you have a risk of not getting this deal done. So you do not want to take a deal that asks for closing costs if it jeopardizes your appraisal. How do you know? You don't totally know, but you need to do some research on that. If I'm representing you as your agent with professional advantage, you bet I'm going to be looking at the comparable sales to see if that deal is going to fly with that higher contract price. Because if you got a price home for sale for $150,000 and they've offered you $153,000 for, in exchange for 6% back at closing for closing costs, you weren't anticipating selling for $150. You were thinking of selling for $145 maybe. But now you're selling for $153. What if you don't appraise for $153? You don't have a deal. So it's a waste of your time, took you off the market. So you got to be very careful about getting into a deal like that, not because it's wrong, just because of the appraised value. It makes it more difficult to get the home appraised. Another way to counter it is you can give them option A and option B. Option A and option B. This is kind of interesting. So you could say, okay, I'll give you this price and this much closing costs. That's option A. Or I'll give you this price and this much closing costs, option B. It's sort of interesting because you don't know how much cash the buyer has. The buyer might have more cash. They just don't want to put their cash in the deal, so they could be asking you for closing costs. So you don't know what the real story is with the buyer. So don't assume you do know, because you don't. And if you assume, you'll be wrong every time, because I know it. I've been down this road. So assume you don't know how much cash the buyer has. So you can give them different choices. And actually, it's a real creative way to counter a buyer, especially when they ask for closing costs, giving them an option A and option B. Just make them different. And one would be less closing cost help for them, and one would be more. That way they can say, oh, I like option A, and you just all of a sudden you got a deal. So it's not just like one answer, it's a either or. So that's another suggestion that you might use. But anyway, that's my take on closing costs. Nothing wrong with it. Just be careful with appraised value.